a woman asked her doctor to announce her death. The husband and mistress were joyfully counting the enormous inheritance. But when a faint knock on the door was heard, all interesting men seemed to be married. At first, you laugh dismissively at such words, then you simply forget about them for a long time. There are more interesting topics to consider. Then, one fine day, you suddenly find yourself at 35, and the thought of including a successful marriage in your near-future plans crosses your mind. Suddenly, you are unpleasantly surprised. All decent candidates are already taken. That plain girl from the neighbouring department has been married to a guy with a spacious downtown apartment for 3 years now. He inherited it. Her mother-in-law has a house in Florida, free accommodation by the sea every vacation. And the assistant from the sales department, who is quite plump for her age and resembles a naive guinea pig, is also well settled, living with her husband in a suburban house with an apple orchard. Emily always thought she had plenty of time to get married. She was sure that loneliness wasn't going to be an issue for her. She could take her time and enjoy her youth and freedom. But the kind of freedom she ended up with began to wear her down. Freedom is best enjoyed when balanced with something else. When both parties only care about work, plus all sorts of corporate training and other nonsense, there's hardly any time left to enjoy life. It seems that with a smart approach, a successful marriage can bring more pleasure and benefit than building a career from scratch, unless you're the daughter of a wealthy father. Emily started looking at her admirers, friends, and even just acquaintances as potential husbands, and found nothing comforting. Absolutely nothing. No one seemed suitable for the role of a husband. One was handsome but had a mortgage that left him barely scraping by until the next paycheck. Another was the life of the party and seemed to earn well, but he paid alimony for a child and supported his parents. There wasn't much left for himself, let alone a wife. A few others, if they wanted to marry, wouldn't choose someone without her own place. Materialistic suitors, it seemed. Of course, there were those who were willing to invest in a family, but they had already been snapped up by smart girls who knew how to present themselves well. Who was left to choose from now? Or was it just Emily who was so unlucky? During her recent vacation, it seemed that luck smiled at her. Emily was attracted to a charming, athletic blonde with cheerful eyes. He politely and sweetly offered to buy her a cocktail at the beach bar. Just a minute later, when she agreed, it turned out his name was Edward, and that he was from the same city as she was. Only he lived in a private sector in a prestigious area. Assuming he wasn't exaggerating to gain her trust. In any case, this Ed was gallant and pleasant to talk to. At least she'd have pleasant memories of the vacation. The further development of their acquaintance gave Emily hope. Ed offered a ride on a small yacht he had rented for fishing, and in the evening a dinner at a restaurant. "Just don't suggest splitting the bill in half, please," Emily said coquettishly and boldly, so she could be taken both seriously and as a joke. "I'm not only a poor girl, but also old-fashioned." "What are you talking about? How could I? I would never suspect a feminist in such a charming lady," Ed replied, in tune with her. "In my humble opinion, you should be treated, entertained, and pampered." "I love such opinions," Emily laughed genuinely. The life experience accumulated by the age of 35 suggested to her that at first you only dream, and by the end of the evening the man manages to ruin the impression of himself. But this time, everything was going perfectly smoothly. First, Edward was clearly not too poor. He rented a small maneuverable yacht for a week, not with friends, which often happens, but on his own. Second, Edward was not stingy. Emily had seen enough of tight-fisted men who preferred unpretentious girls. She had also often found herself having a real dinner at home after being treated to coffee with a scoop of ice cream, which was all her date could afford. Ed, as it turned out, was not frugal. "Do you like gourmet food, or are you on a diet?" "Be honest," he asked on the yacht. "Because I'm planning to order us a grilled seafood platter with various sauces, asparagus wrapped in Langston, and a decent bottle of white wine. One to start with more if we're in the mood." "I love all that," Emily smiled. "You asked for honesty? Well, I can eat a whole tray of exactly what you're planning to order." "You'd never guess." Ed feigned genuine surprise. "Are you a witch?" "I'm so emotional that it all just burns away," Emily chirped happily. It seemed Ed truly found her attractive and worth the expense. After the first bottle of expensive wine, he ordered a second and generously tipped the musicians, who played several beautiful melodies at his request. After dinner and dancing, they chatted a bit more about life, interspersed with unexpected compliments. Then, he simply walked her to her room, smiled reservedly, and hopefully asked, "See you tomorrow, right?" "See you tomorrow." Emily nodded, confident that he would find any excuse to be invited to her or invite her to him. But she was very surprised. At first, she even wanted to playfully ask, "Aren't you coming in tonight?" But fearfully stopped herself. "Don't ruin the impression of yourself, silly." "Good night," she said, agreeing to meet after breakfast. And 5 minutes later, sitting on the balcony couch, gazing into the dark, languid southern night, she excitedly told her friend Sarah about her new acquaintance. "I don't know how things will go, but today I was really surprised. Imagine, such romance in our time. He arranged such an evening and just left. Can you believe it?" "Maybe that's his method," suggested the critical Sarah. "Look how you're gushing with excitement. Listen to yourself. He's already made the right impression on you, and tomorrow you'll be running to meet him in the mood he wants." "Sarah, you're in the wrong profession," Emily praised her. "You should have studied psychology instead of accounting." "You laid it all out perfectly," Emily sighed. I know that Ed will want to get to know each other better tomorrow, but it's not like I'm against it. I only have 10 days of vacation, so I can't stretch out the courtship. If I continue to like him, I'll make an effort to continue our romance back home. It can't be a coincidence that we're from the same city." Indeed, in a day or two, Ed and Emily's romance blossomed into a passionate and sparkling affair, and they became the beautiful couple of the season that everyone turned to look at. Emily didn't believe that happiness loves silence, and enjoyed hearing the echoes of whispers behind her back. All those "what did he see in her?" and other snide remarks. Female envy is predictable. Let those hens discuss her. Meanwhile, men look with interest and envy Ed. "Listen, dear, don't make any plans," warned Sarah. "In such beautiful cases, when the hero is generous and gallant at a resort, he always turns out to be married to some dull woman. Haven't you asked him about this yet? I don't recognize you." "Sarah, don't spoil it," Emily laughed, begging. "Even if I find out he's married, what will change? It's not like I'll walk off into the sunset with a proud stride. I'm not going anywhere. I'll just think about how the fairy tale will soon end. And I don't want to think about anything like that right now. At least I should have pleasant memories of my vacation. It would be funny if your knight is married and someone from our town who knows his wife runs into you on the beach." "Okay, enough with the scenarios. There's not a single face from our town here. Let us meet even the Pope," Emily declared carelessly. Ed flew to the sea a few days earlier than Emily and was leaving first. She was to spend the last couple of days of her vacation without him. "Don't get into too much trouble without me, hot girl," he joked sadly, then warned, "I've bribed the bartenders to call and report how you're behaving." "At home you won't have time for that, sweetie," Emily replied, trying to maintain a carefree tone. "Your mundane life will begin, work, family." "Yes, family," Ed confirmed rather gloomily, lowering his eyes into the clear seawater as if looking for fish. "Thank you for not asking about it, for not ruining the beauty of what happened. I really appreciate it. You're a smart woman. As you guessed, I am married, unfortunately for me, especially now. And that's no lie, Emily, you must see it in me. It's just that this marriage is quite difficult to break. Let's not now, okay? I'll explain it to you when we see each other at home. You won't tell me that we won't continue our meetings because of silly prejudices, will you?" I will miss you and wait for you. Don't promise, okay? Emily asked with calculated softness. By the time I return, you might change your mind, and that would upset me greatly. Does that mean it's as important to you as it is to me? Ed asked, embracing her. It means... Emily smiled, trying to appear mysteriously restrained. To her own surprise, she wasn't at all upset that Ed was married. It really seemed like he had fallen for her. He even gave her a ring and a pendant before leaving, bought from a local jeweler, and the price didn't stop him. Such gifts aren't given at the end of a casual, pleasant romance. They're simply unnecessary. So, will he propose to make her his permanent lover? Everything seems to be heading that way. And why not take advantage of such an opportunity? Emily had no candidates for marriage on the horizon anyway, and a well-off lover is often much better than a husband. Moreover, not only in distant lands but also among her acquaintances, there were cases when a mistress became a wife. So why not take the risk? When Edward grew tired of enduring Jennifer and adjusting to her interests, he modestly and unobtrusively complained of severe work fatigue, and after a couple of weeks he would set off on vacation. Usually this helped, and upon returning he effortlessly played the role of a model husband. Now the usual reset method was failing. It seemed life really needed to change. Recently he met a classmate, and the guy was so positive it was sickening. A young, beloved wife purring next to him, a fishing shop increasing its turnover. Life was good. And what did Ed have to boast about? Resort romances? A collection of vacation beauties who thought he was a successful, self-sufficient man, kind of weak for his age. In a respectable male company, it would draw crooked smiles. And it's not about the company, but about himself. Didn't other hints of fate work? Here's a meeting with Emily that seriously hooked him. Start over. Live for your own pleasure. Edward began seriously pondering his prospects as soon as the plane took off from the runway. Interesting. How many others on the plane felt the same way? Who didn't want to return home from vacation? No successful ideas for changing his life came to mind. Miracles don't happen. If he divorced Jennifer, he would seriously lose financially and couldn't maintain his usual lifestyle. And then Emily would certainly lose interest in him. Even if she agreed to stay with him when he became an ordinary citizen, stretching his salary for a month, he himself wouldn't last long enjoying such a life. With the woman he loved, it would quickly become as unbearable as with the one he didn't love if he couldn't provide a comfortable, pleasant life for her and himself. Fights and reproaches would start, endless boredom. The ideal life that would suit Ed was simple. Finances should come with sweet Emily, and for complete happiness, Emily with finances. But for now, the material wealth came with Jennifer, his legal wife. A similar way to free oneself and lose nothing is to become a widower, Ed grimly joked to himself. Ugh, what absurd nonsense comes to mind. Jennifer was waiting for her husband to return from vacation and tried to keep busy with work to stay in shape and appear energetic and cheerful. Otherwise, when talking to her dad, she'd have to answer his eternal question about why she and Ed never vacationed together. Since her father, Nigel Finnegan, officially handed over his small business to Jennifer, deciding it was time for him to enjoy a well-deserved rest, he noticeably changed. If earlier he noticed little besides work, now, unexpectedly for everyone who knew him, he began to show a caring interest in the lives of those around him. And, of course, Jennifer got the most of it. Constantine found a lot incomprehensible in her family life. He couldn't accept that Jennifer's husband, using his wife's resources, allowed himself to live in a way he never could on his own earnings, was content with himself, and wasn't embarrassed by this situation. Dad, you were always the sensible one, Jennifer patiently explained to her father for the umpteenth time. I have a father like you. Ed wasn't so lucky. Is it his fault? I had completely different starting opportunities. Imagine if I hadn't worked with you right after college, would I still be a CEO now? You know well that's not in my character. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be earning more than Ed now. And if I'm lucky enough to lead a comfortable life, why not share this pleasure with my own husband? If each of us lived only on our own money, what kind of family would that be? Sorry, but remember, Mom hardly worked after I was born because I was constantly sick. You never said she didn't earn her car or vacations by the sea. You provided it yourself. Because I'm the man in this family, her father interjected stubbornly. And I'd be ashamed if I didn't. But your comparison. Your mom was always running to doctors with you and managed to create such a cozy home that I returned there like a paradise and rested my soul. And that's a job harder than any other. We had it as it should be. She for me, I for her, whatever each of us did best. What has your Ed done for you? To dress in boutiques and travel to resorts on your money? Dad, let's agree. Jennifer began to lose patience. I married for love and knew who I was marrying. And it's enough for me that I just love my husband, not to count who invested how much money in our common life. For just love, people keep a little dog or a cat, a pocket one with bulging eyes. What's it called? Chihuahua, her father smirked. Daddy, let's stop discussing this endless topic, Jennifer begged expressively, folding her hands in supplication. Her father graciously fell silent, but whenever Ed was mentioned, he could always ask, "How's your favorite Chihuahua?" Jennifer tried not to be offended. Her dad taught her everything she needed for work. He did so much for her, and he loved her dearly as best he could. Jennifer decided to marry late. In their generation, most already had school-age children by her age. Maybe that's why her father turned a blind eye to the fact that he didn't like her choice. After all, he wasn't the one living with this son-in-law. It was Jennifer. She's a grown woman and not stupid. Let her decide for herself, especially since it's time to think about children. However, Jennifer and this Ed never had children, and it didn't seem to bother her husband. Konstantin Pavlovich was frustrated to realize that he had been right from the start of his daughter's married life. His son-in-law clearly married for a comfortable and affluent life. Jennifer married at 30, exactly 5 years ago. Ed was 25 then. She was a bit embarrassed that she was older than him, and was glad that it didn't bother Ed at all. Many high school seniors look more mature than you, he declared, when Jennifer scrutinized her round, smooth face with a slightly upturned nose in the mirror, and decided she could stop worrying. Of course, at first Jennifer thought that such a charming man, the life of any party like Ed, could have found someone brighter than her, and, meeting him, she was constantly ready for it to be short-lived. One day he would change his mind and disappear from her horizon, maybe even apologizing. He was so gallant, polite. Jennifer long resisted falling in love with him, even though he seemed to do everything for it. He was old-fashionedly persistent, proving he wasn't going to back down. Jennifer, aren't you tired of endlessly analyzing and trying to foresee everything like an old granny? Do you want to miss all the interesting things in life just to avoid mistakes? Asked her friend Julie, watching in amazement as Jennifer resisted an exciting romance. Julie always adhered to one principle: if you really want something, you can. And judging by her appearance and mood, the principle justified itself. Julie was always satisfied with herself and life, and if it turned out she did something wrong, she never regretted it. It means I needed it at that moment. It just doesn't matter now, Julie said, and it was clear she truly didn't worry. I'll never learn to treat life like you, Jennifer said with a hint of envy. And you don't need to be like me. Long live your own style, Julie laughed encouragingly. Just don't shy away from a nice guy. Jennifer was all ready, scolding herself for being overly cautious. She even mentally asked her late mother without a hint of reproach with a sad smile, "Why did you raise me this way?" Her mother tried to explain something, but her voice wasn't audible. An invisible but insurmountable wall separated them. No. One must live life alive and real. Jennifer was so tired of the cold she had surrounded herself with for some reason. She decided to ignore caution and submit to her desires at least once. She liked it so much that she wouldn't have regretted it even if her captivating romance had been short-lived and disappeared without a trace. But to her surprise, just a couple of months later, she found herself happily engaged to Ed. Jennifer was confident. Her fiancé was as happy as she was, if not more. He had waited so long, was so patient, and tried so hard that he deserved her trust. When her father asked how Ed planned to provide for the family, she replied, "We plan to achieve everything together, Dad. You forget I'm not marrying someone your age. Where could Ed have any financial status if he's not the heir to a grandfather's fortune?" Jennifer was entirely convinced that the prospective groom's financial situation was the last thing she should focus on. She worked with her dad and had enough experience not to worry about a stable income. Financial concerns in a husband are something girls who genuinely need material support might fear. She could build a relationship based on love without looking back. Despite her not yet 30 years, Jennifer was as inexperienced in love as a teenager. After the wedding, they settled in a spacious downtown apartment. Her dad had bought it for her several years ago when Jennifer graduated from college and expressed a desire to live independently. Before the wedding, Ed rented an apartment with a friend colleague, each living in their own room. He had graduated just 2 years ago and was eager to prove himself in the big city, entirely undeterred by a lack of support. Ed's mother raised him alone and, despite her best intentions, couldn't help. She needed rest and assistance herself. She only came to the wedding from a small town where she was born and lived her entire life. She turned out to be a reserved, polite woman, embarrassed to address her daughter-in-law or father-in-law with even a simple question, and only wished for her son's happiness. After the wedding, she thanked them for the warm reception and quietly disappeared as if she had dissolved. It seemed Jennifer wouldn't face any difficulties because of her mother-in-law. Life after the wedding promised a series of happy years. Everything was so good, and it should only get better. They spent their honeymoon in the Dominican Republic, a gift from her dad. From the first day, Ed showed himself to be an attentive, caring, and considerate husband. Jennifer strove to do the same for him. How could she not? Ed supported all her ideas, always listened to her no matter her mood, and never called her opinions silly. Even her friends envied, comparing their husbands to Jennifer's Ed. Jennifer didn't care that after several years, her husband hadn't succeeded in his work enough to give her gifts of equal value. Ed was simply less fortunate from childhood, and it's silly to measure everything, including life success, with money. Over time, their family life didn't spoil per se. It just settled into its groove and accumulated traditions. Unnoticeably, they began spending vacations separately. Ed continued working as an employee, never expressing a desire to join the family business. He feared not getting along with his demanding, picky father-in-law. He preferred to take vacations in the summer when there were more options for travel. He indulged his passion for traveling, never visiting the same place twice. For Jennifer, summer was the busiest work season. The annual income depended on the summer months. She took vacations during the post-New Year lull, going with friends to places where she could catch both winter and summer simultaneously. For the past couple of years, Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that something was off between her and Ed. Some friends claimed it was due to the absence of children. Youth had long ended. It was time to become parents. And if there were difficulties with that, adopt a child. There were plenty of healthy babies abandoned by young mothers. Others said, "It's not about the kids. You simply never had real problems. You don't know what it's like when you can't pay a loan, so you're just bored in your fully arranged life, like all spoiled daddy's princesses." But Jennifer was convinced it wasn't about that. She began to feel that her husband was happy for any opportunity to take a break from her company. You'd think they only saw each other late at night, but he seemed uninterested in listening to her news or sharing his. When she tactfully tried to find out why he seemed so distant, Ed simply said he was tired. Maybe he just wasn't interested. Year after year, it was the same with her. And really, why would Ed want to hear endless stories about the business with her dad? Maybe he was always bored listening to it. Perhaps Jennifer was younger and more attractive before, and he pretended to be interested in what she said. But now, when she was no longer a girl and increasingly looked tired from the morning, he realized he was tired of pretending. He called from vacation only twice. Those were perfunctory, somewhat strained calls, like a conversation between colleagues forced to communicate because they work together. What had she done wrong? She sincerely showed her care, didn't exhaust her husband with whims, demands, or reproaches. Maybe it was just the usual fatigue from each other. A common occurrence for couples with history, and she simply wanted the impossible. With this thought, on the eve of her husband's return from vacation, Jennifer was getting ready for bed when the phone rang. It was her friend Julie calling. "Are you asleep?" she asked, as if they had had nightly conversations all their lives. "No, I'm just lying here thinking." Jennifer smiled sadly. "My mum just returned from the sea." "Did I tell you I sent her to Cancun?" "She's always dreamed of traveling, but there was never enough money. I finally told my husband, we're such selfish people. She spends all summer at the Dasha with our kids and doesn't see anything. Yes, she should rest as she's always dreamed. Give my regards to Mrs. Bennet. How her eyes must be shining. By the way, Ed is also in Cancun right now." Jennifer grew alert. "Jennifer, my mom is, of course, thrilled. Now, if only we had enough money to send her every year. But I'm not calling for that." "What do you mean?" "We even argued with my mom about whether to call you." "What?" "But I decided to." "About what?" Julie sighed. "Mrs. Bennet swears she saw your Ed last night at a restaurant terrace, dancing in an embrace with a curvy brunette, with whom, judging by the context, he's in a close relationship." "Does your mum want to intervene?" Jennifer smirked. "No, but the couple was visible even from the street. Mom says they weren't really hiding. You could see they were having a sweet conversation." "Julie, you know your mom has been observant since childhood." "Yes, but I still had to wrestle the photo from her. Her phone camera is weak, so I personally can't say for sure if it's him or not." "Should I send you the picture or not?" "You decided to tell me." "Send the photo," Jennifer exhaled. "Maybe it's not even Ed," Julie suggested. "That's what I told my mum. You could have mistaken him for anyone. You've only seen him a few times and a long time ago." But she insisted, "No, that's definitely Jennifer's husband." Then she said, "Let this stay between us, so as not to upset you." "Well, then she should have kept it to herself," Jennifer sighed. "Anyway, I decided it was better to inform you. Listen, even if it is him. So what? A person can't dance in a restaurant in the evening on vacation. Remember, we also met some locals in Thailand last winter and went to the crocodile farm together. Remember?" "Send it already, Julie," Jennifer interrupted. "Thanks. I'm waiting." Despite her combative nature, Julie didn't like to upset her friends, which is why she tried to allow for the possibility of a mistake. But as soon as Jennifer looked at the photo, all doubts vanished. The picture showed her husband, Edward. He was tenderly embracing a girl by the waist. You don't dance like that with strangers. For some reason, there was no surprise. Thinking about how something had gone wrong in their life together, Jennifer simply forbade herself from pondering the reasons. She focused on work, and in her personal life, she had only one serious romance, with her future husband. And it ended in marriage, to which she also dutifully committed, like a job. It never occurred to her to regret knowing so little about men and love. Perhaps women like Jennifer, if they are loved briefly. They are simply too boring. The girl in the photo was captured in profile, in the dim light of the restaurant. Her face wasn't clearly visible, but even a glance at the curve of her figure, the flowing hair down her back, and the posture of Ed's dance partner was enough to understand. She lost to this stranger in every way. If Ed wanted to leave, Jennifer had nothing to hold him with. It's not even about this particular woman. Most likely Ed would never see her again after the vacation, and they would go their separate ways. But how many such magnetic women were there? Jennifer didn't have that innate ability to attract men. It seemed she was born only to develop her dad's business. What now? Follow naive advice. Lose weight, change your hairstyle. Who have they helped? She had nowhere to lose weight. Her figure was already slim. And she had always worn her hair short. Her husband never said it bothered him. What now? Put on a wig for his return? Ridiculous. Running to consult with Julie or any other friends was entirely unappealing. They would start sympathizing and again handing out advice on appearance, on cunning behavior. Perhaps a business-like approach was best. Don't panic and observe to find the right strategy. Ed needn't have worried about losing his finesse and acting skills. Returning home from his wonderful vacation, he easily slipped back into the familiar role of a decent husband. It seemed this role was ingrained in him. Jennifer met him somewhat awkwardly, not even showing she missed him. But it didn't bother him. If he suddenly decided to leave, someone younger, fresher, with shining eyes would immediately take his place. Someone who would prove their love daily for a comfortable and affluent life. No, folks. Find yourselves other convenient wives. This feeder is occupied. After Emily's return and nearly until Christmas, everything went as smoothly as possible for them. Jennifer immersed herself in work. She was trying to give the business a new direction, and both she and her father plunged into work. Her wife's global busyness gave Ed plenty of free time, which he spent with pleasure in Emily's company. He both liked and disliked that he had truly grown attached to his mistress. When relationships become constant, playing the chosen role becomes more difficult. It would be better if Emily found out from him, not from random third parties, that all his gloss was the result of a marriage of convenience. She's not a young girl, not naive. She should understand. It seems they have quite a bit in common. Ed left his hometown without looking back right after school. He categorically disliked recalling his childhood. He and his mother lived poorly, her earnings barely covering the essentials. Fortunately, there was also his grandmother. Her pension also went into the common pot. How his mother dared to have a child from a fleeting affair with a travelling salesman, Ed couldn't understand. But his mother explained it simply. It was scary to wait for something else. By age, I had to hurry not to be left completely alone when Grandma was gone. Ed was angry with her, but silently. He still liked being alive. He just needed to figure out how. In school, in their class, anything valuable and interesting appeared for him last. If it appeared at all. Besides underwear, he didn't even have his own clothes. Only second-hand items or those given by his mother's acquaintances from grown children. But Ed was respected among his peers. He honed his sense of humour and the ability to fit into any group. He instantly grasped what behaviour was popular there. Did he become better now? Or just learn to hide himself even more skillfully? The only thing he could thank his parents for, he turned out quite handsome. This was confirmed by the glances of familiar girls. By the end of school, Ed had fully settled into his role. Classmates from well-off families had fashionable outfits and technological novelties in their arsenal. Ed invented a different style for himself, a witty, cheerful, romantic guy in torn jeans, despising symbols of a beautiful life. This role suited him perfectly. He successfully used this image later when he moved to the nearest big city. He took the simplest job to avoid starving and studied part-time. His loving grandmother naively believed that all employers required a diploma, so she supported him wholeheartedly. But Ed quickly realized that even after graduation, he would have to work for a long time before reaching a decent standard of living. For this, it was time to start making efforts now. By his final year, he had changed his image, from a romantic hero in rags to an ambitious manager dreaming of success. The new image played well for him, especially since he managed to find a job as a sales representative. Of course, it meant he spent all day running around the city and its surroundings like a driven horse. But he mastered the language, manners, and habits of sales agents brilliantly. A business suit suited him well, even if it was still cheap. Of course, such a life was exhausting, but he had no choice. His mother and grandmother could provide a home-cooked dinner, but that was all they could do. They couldn't change his life. The only improvement during his studies was that Ed moved from the dorm to a room. He and a friend rented an apartment together. There was a semblance of home comfort. It became possible to bring girls over. Of course, Ed never even thought about serious, permanent relationships. They required expenses, and he needed to escape poverty. True, he was lucky with girls. Friends envied him. This handsome guy always found girls willing to love him selflessly, for moonlit walks and romantic chatter. No special talents were required of him. Behave politely, be courteous, gallant. Say what the girl wants to hear. Nothing complicated. Why did others consider his ability to charm a special stroke of luck? But fate decided it was time to gift him with a meeting with Jennifer. It was luck on the level of a jackpot. It was a ticket to the social elevator. Of course, Jennifer was older than him, and slightly tedious. Besides, she listened to her father too much, and was obsessed with work, but overall, not unpleasant, pretty, no problematic character, and, it seemed, falling more in love with him, though trying to resist, too serious. Weighing the pros and cons, Ed clearly understood. The pros outweighed the cons. He just needed to make a little more effort, and soon he became the husband of a businessman's daughter, owning a small suburban furniture production, a landscape design bureau, and some warehouse. It seemed like just the beginning. They would have more. Not bad for the son of a single mother, from a poor town with no decent work. By the end of September, the intensity of the work schedule began to slow down smoothly but noticeably. Jennifer could already catch her breath, look around, and think about something unrelated to work. The conclusions were reassuring. Jennifer's husband, Ed, was no different from the one she sent off on vacation. Jennifer was confident. If someone truly developed serious feelings for another woman, he couldn't hide it from his wife for long. They spent all September weekends together, simultaneously pleasing her dad by keeping him company on trips to the country house. The country house wasn't some exemplary hacienda in a gardening cooperative like those their company designed furniture and designs for. The country house was a village hut with a dense, overgrown garden, without any vegetable patches, on the edge of the village, right by the forest. Earlier, her dad went there with her mom and friends, then just with friends. Now, when both his wife and 2 of his 3 friends had gone to where you couldn't reach them, her dad missed his country house but didn't want to sit alone, reminiscing. But he was incredibly happy that his daughter and son-in-law finally grew to appreciate real rest. Jennifer and her dad relaxed after busy work weeks, disappearing into forest hikes for mushrooms and berries. And Ed, indifferent to the call of the forest, disappeared at the river. He often brought home fish, sometimes even large ones, but he also learned to appreciate the taste of mushrooms with fried potatoes. By the time Jennifer and her dad returned from the forest, Ed was either still not back from fishing or still catching up on sleep. Only once did Jennifer find him home and not asleep. When she and her dad emerged from the forest to the hut, Ed was sitting by the open window to the garden, talking on the phone. Jennifer heard Ed's convincing voice. "Please, I'll do everything as agreed, but not immediately. Haste in such matters can be too costly." Seeing Jennifer and her father, he irritably ended the obviously tiresome conversation and explained, "The downside of modern technology, even in this beautiful wilderness, work voices find you and try to ruin your life." They decided they would continue coming to the village until the end of October if the autumn wasn't too early and cold. On the first Monday in October, returning from work, Jennifer felt an irresistible urge to sleep after dinner. She had planned to wait for Ed to discuss something, but she was so tired, as if she had been unloading bags of cement. Though there was no particular reason for fatigue, her head spun more, her pulse quickened, her stomach ached, and her muscles seemed to refuse to obey. Magnetic storms? Jennifer thought as she fell into a strange, heavy sleep. If someone shouted, "Fire!" now, she wouldn't be able to jump to her feet. She simply couldn't command them to move. Did she even have legs? Jennifer woke up on a hospital bed. Her whole body felt weak, as if it were made of cotton. But it was still pleasant to realize that she was herself. Thoughts gathered slowly, like snails. She felt ashamed. When the doctor came, Jennifer couldn't immediately answer simple questions. How did she feel? What had she eaten and drunk in the past 2 days? She was picking words as if speaking a foreign language, and languages had never come easily to her. The strange doctor was still inexplicably pleased with her answers. Maybe I'm not talking nonsense after all. And suddenly Jennifer felt alive. She felt it when she got angry. Do I look so ridiculous? The doctor turned out to be a grey-haired, stately man in his 50s with a neat, short beard. He looked like a gentleman from films based on Agatha Christie's novels. You don't want to look foolish in front of someone like that. Mrs. Langston, the doctor announced happily, it's too early for you to return to active life, but there's no longer a threat to your life. A threat? Jennifer croaked. Not all tests are ready yet, so I can't guarantee absolute accuracy. But most likely it's a seasonal case, poisoning by poisonous mushrooms. I couldn't have been poisoned by mushrooms. Jennifer was almost offended. I'm not someone who's only seen nature in books. I've been able to distinguish mushrooms since childhood. My parents taught me. We're all passionate about mushroom hunting in the family, and I've never even had a stomachache more than twice in my life. She raised her hand as if taking an oath. I could write a book on how not to confuse edible mushrooms with poisonous lookalikes, and even take responsibility for the published information. That's confidence, the doctor chuckled. Jennifer looked at him intently. No, he wasn't laughing. He seemed to be pondering something of his own. Thank you very much. Jennifer remembered to thank the doctor only now. Really, thank you. And what's your name? Noah. Now the doctor smiled a bit belatedly. Noah, Jennifer decided to clarify. Is something wrong with me? The picture of poisoning is contradictory. It doesn't fit your diagnosis. By the way, I'm a long-time mushroom hunter myself, your colleague. He smiled into his beard. Nevertheless, I can admit that even for us, accidental poisoning can happen. You know, a toadstool among meadow champignons. God forbid. But your case is different. What kind? Jennifer asked, tensing up. It's as if you received small doses of poison over several sessions. The doctor looked at her intently. That's the point. It's extremely difficult to determine, but due to some circumstances and accumulated experience, I got lucky. He paused. I recently defended a dissertation on poisoning of this kind, and a specialist unfamiliar with this narrow field would have found it more challenging to figure out. Okay, Mrs. Langston. He suddenly laughed. I've gotten carried away with self-promotion. Sorry. I need to inform your family that your condition is satisfactory. By the way, your husband didn't believe it was possible to avoid the worst. Please wait. Jennifer exhaled. Quietly, but so sharply and decisively that she scared herself by the absurdly horrifying thought that suddenly occurred to her. She even forgot about dizziness and weakness, and managed not only to rise but to sit up in bed as if she would stand and run in a minute. Why? Noah asked sympathetically and seriously. Well, you need a character to react so calmly to crazy fools putting all sorts of garbage in their mouths. Please don't think the mushroom toxins are still fermenting and causing obsessive hallucinations, Jennifer joked grimly. I'll call my father myself. Is he healthy? As far as I understood, yes. We spoke on the phone. So he's a mushroom hunter too. And you became one because of him, it turns out? Jennifer nodded. What health problems did he start having? The doctor advised him a diet to prevent those problems from worsening. And he had to give up mushrooms. Yes, they're considered heavy food. Noah rubbed his chin thoughtfully. So, mushrooms. Jennifer took a deep breath. Could I ask you for a favor? Yes, if it's within my power and competence, the doctor reassured her. Jennifer looked at him almost pleadingly. Please tell my husband that I died. Excuse me, what? Isn't that punishable by law for you? No need to joke right now. She looked at him completely seriously. I really ask you, just tell him that, please. You can even arrange an examination to prove I'm not insane or paranoid. Noah looked at her intently and decided against joking. Even if I was going to, he drawled, thoughtfully looking at Jennifer. It's good when you've worked here for 25 years. You get to see so many different cases that you don't rush to laugh at anything. He sighed. If your suspicions have serious grounds, it's better to exclude the risk, he declared. But then I'd advise no childishness. I inform your husband that you've passed away, but we involve the police. My friend, I mean the victim, is not the kind of person who falls into hysteria or, moreover, panic and imagines things that aren't there. Julie eagerly and confidently explained to the investigator. To her, he seemed too skeptical and indifferent to the case. She's businesslike, calm, always thinks 10 times before speaking. So, after your mother's story about the alleged infidelity committed by her husband on vacation, Jennifer Langston took no action, the investigator clarified. Didn't believe it, didn't recognize her husband in the photo, or for other reasons. For other reasons, Julie confidently replied. She's absolutely convinced that the photo shows her husband. But you see this photo, the investigator shrugged. The people in it are just dancing. No one caught or photographed them in bed. And what should my friend have done? Julie asked mockingly. Live as they did before this vacation, especially since Edward showed no desire to change anything. She straightened up. I can repeat it for you. Jennifer is not the kind of person to make accusations without absolute certainty. And you don't consider the possibility of revenge for infidelity, the investigator parried indifferently. I don't consider it. It's complicated, foolish, not Jennifer's style. She even tried not to believe in the infidelity. She told me when we discussed the case, even if there was a casual romance, what's important is how Ed will behave now. And Ed behaved impeccably, and Jennifer returned to work. It so happened that she and her dad had a surge in business. Julie smirked. If she wanted to retaliate, she had the means. In what sense? In the literal sense, Julie shrugged. Everything valuable in the Langston family belongs to Jennifer. Real estate? Her father bought her an apartment before the wedding. Business? Officially, a couple of years ago, he transferred all assets to her. She's quite an heiress and not stingy. She shared all the benefits with Ed for all 15 years since their wedding. If you check his credit history, he has no loans. And he bought his car for cash. The investigator paused. How does that align with his salary? That's my question too. But the most interesting thing is Jennifer made a will for Ed. When the entire business became hers, she told me, I was wide-eyed. I asked her, why do you need that? She's so prudent and proper, and she said, it's standard practice, so if anything happens to me, Ed gets everything by law. Julie smirked. According to her, he wouldn't take up business matters out of principle. Does Edward Langston know he's the sole heir to his wife? Of course he knows. The investigator looked at her intently. And what do you think? Would he want to divorce his wife and lose everything? When he's long since stopped moving, would you divorce? What's it got to do with me? The investigator asked irritably, and there was even a hint of frustration in his voice that he didn't have a wealthy wife. If he did, he'd open a detective agency, listening to witness confessions for entirely different money. He'd have to behave more politely and listen to testimonies with respect. How do you explain why your friend initially turned a blind eye to her husband's possible infidelities, never tried to catch him, and now suddenly assumes, without evidence, that he attempted to take her life? Such a reaction could be the result of shock after poisoning which could have ended fatally. It couldn't. In this case, it doesn't matter, Julie stated. There are grounds for suspicion. She paused. Every weekend in September and early October, the Langstons, along with Jennifer's father, went to the village. They each enjoyed their leisure. Jennifer and her dad went mushroom and berry picking, and Edward went fishing. And after the first trip, Jennifer happily told me, after the forest outings, we fool around, and Ed became a chef. He spoils us with village delicacies. He fries the fish he caught, and the mushrooms we picked with Dad. It's like all-inclusive, Julie pursed her lips. She liked it so much that they decided to maintain this tradition for every village trip. They said the mushrooms in the forest wouldn't run out, everything was great. Jennifer and her dad only brought them from the forest. They didn't participate in culinary chores, so Ed could add whatever he wanted, and no one knew what he brought home besides his carps and perches. While his wife and father-in-law wandered the woods, the investigator straightened up, and Jennifer's attending physician Noah. When you interrogated him, he already told you as a doctor that Jennifer received small doses of poison that accumulated. The last dose was larger than the previous ones, and with her level of mushroom knowledge, she couldn't have picked toadstools every week. Julie paused. But according to the specialist, she ate them every week. Such a delicate cuisine. The investigator turned on the air conditioner. It became stuffy above the table. Julie, with her emotions and unjustified antipathy towards the investigation, clearly belonged to the difficult type of witnesses. But she had analytical abilities, and dismissing the case was unacceptable. It was crystal clear. The testimony of the victim herself, her father, the attending physician, and her friend Julie didn't contradict each other. They only complemented the overall picture. The suspicions became too obvious. The suspicions warranted thorough investigation. Of course, he would have stopped the investigation if the victim had succumbed to emotions and hadn't reported that her husband was told about her death. But now they had to proceed with what they had, and let the victim not be offended that her temporary residence would remain the same hospital for a little longer. Jennifer had no intention of being offended. Of course, it was slightly eerie to be considered dead to her husband and acquaintances to whom he had already told about her untimely demise. But it would have been more accurate to say it would have been eerie if not for Noah's jokes at every opportunity on the subject. Jennifer felt guilty towards him. He already had a tense job, and now there were calls to the investigator and this whole ridiculous detective story. But he, calm and ironic, declared that a change in the type of problems was sometimes a kind of rest. Most non-standard situations, if they don't end in fatality, are perceived more easily than routine, he once smirked. Jennifer had been living in a separate room for 3 days, like in a small, clean hotel. She even resumed her usual work. Her dad brought her a laptop. Her dad was sad and gloomy, avoiding talking about the case she decided to open. But after speaking with Noah in the corridor, which Jennifer didn't hear, he became somewhat animated. Jennifer herself didn't notice how she began to anticipate her doctor's visits. After all, he could have stopped visiting her. As a patient, she was more of a simulation, and only occupied this room in the interest of the investigation. But he still stopped by, found time either before rounds or after. A gentleman he was, and is. How about that? Not just in appearance. Every time, with a serious face, he managed to make her laugh, as if nothing terrible had happened to her. What if she really falsely accused Ed? Number A's terrifying as it is, it's time to admit there's no other explanation. Every day she pieced together their forest outings with her dad. It was a very mushroomy year. In September they picked only young porcini mushrooms, boletus, and chanterelles. In October, when the abundance decreased, they were delighted with 2 patches of aspen mushrooms. They didn't take any exotic or dubious mushrooms, that's for sure. The investigator already looked at her very irritably. He advised her to stop thinking about it, declared that the investigation was actively working. What a terrible bureaucracy, Emily sighed loudly and drawn out, settling into a deep cocoon chair and sipping pink champagne. They should have finished everything, issued the body and not dragged it out. You still have unpleasant ritual tasks ahead before you can start the process of inheriting. She glanced at Ed. I understand perfectly well what a difficult role it is to portray a grieving widower. By the way, how long is it appropriate to remarry without arousing suspicion? There will always be someone who says, aha, they were seeing each other while the deceased was still alive. In general, a year seems decent. Earlier, it looks unseemly. Ed barely touched his glass to Emily's, enjoying the gentle chime of the collectible glassware. These glasses Jennifer always saved for some holiday, and he believed that one should live today. Let's not talk about the bad, he suggested. We agreed when discussing our plans that we'd immediately stop mentioning it. I know, Emily stretched. I'll stop thinking about it when the funeral is over. Kitten, Ed smiled. I told you, in my hometown, a guy in the next house was poisoned by mushrooms. The whole family ate, but only he died. No one investigated anything. He just got the poisonous one, the others were lucky. And everyone's organisms are different. I wasn't even summoned anywhere, except for the usual procedures. If there were suspicions, they would have called for interrogation long ago. Everything's fine. The sooner we stop discussing this, the sooner we'll forget. Yes, darling, you're right, Emily drawled sweetly. It's just a pity my birthday will have to be spent locked up in the apartment. If someone sees you with me in the restaurant the day after tomorrow, that would be too much. We'll celebrate it properly later, Ed promised, hugging her. If you want, we'll celebrate once a month for the whole year, with gifts. With expensive gifts, Emily laughed, raising her index finger. With lavish ones, he confirmed, smiling broadly. That morning, Edward woke up later than usual. He was given additional leave at work due to the tragic event. He needed to at least catch up on sleep. He hadn't finished shaving when he heard a loud knock at the door. It seemed like Emily hadn't forgotten anything at my place when she left the day before yesterday. She shouldn't come here yet. That would be reckless. Today was her birthday. So, the stylishly decorated rented apartment was just what was needed. They couldn't afford to be seen. In general, these were such minor inconveniences that they could be tolerated for a while. Another knock sounded, sharp and insistent, cutting through the silence of the house. Ed's stomach twisted with unease. It was too early for visitors. He had barely pulled himself together after the staged grief of the past few days. He wiped his smooth chin with a towel, tossing it aside carelessly, and took a deep breath, composing himself. If it was Jennifer's father, he needed to look devastated, grief-stricken. He forced his face into what he hoped was an expression of loss and pulled open the door. His breath caught in his throat. Jennifer stood before him. Alive. Ed could only stare, his brain fumbling for an explanation, a denial, anything that would make sense of what he was seeing. His wife, the woman he had declared dead, the woman whose fortune he had already started mentally dividing, was standing in front of him, flesh and blood, her face calm and composed. She looked different, but certainly not like a corpse. "Hello, Ed." Her voice was smooth, eerily controlled, with none of the warmth it once carried. Ed's first impulse was to slam the door in her face. His hand twitched on the doorknob, and his foot shifted, ready to push it shut, to block out this impossible nightmare. But before he could act, 3 men materialized behind her. 2 in police uniforms, the third in a sharp business suit, his expression unreadable. Ed's mind reeled. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. "Ed Langston." The man in the suit stepped forward, his voice professional, but laced with a tone that sent a cold shiver down Ed's spine. Yes?" Ed's voice came out hoarse, his throat suddenly dry. "I'm Detective Harris. We'd like to have a word with you." Ed swallowed hard, his pulse pounding in his ears. He looked at Jennifer, hoping for some hint, some crack in her facade that would explain what the hell was going on. But her gaze was unwavering, her lips curving slightly, not in a smile, but something colder, sharper. Ed, she said, stepping forward, you look like you've seen a ghost. The words hit him like a slap. A wave of nausea rolled through him. He forced himself to straighten, gripping the edge of the doorframe for support. He had to play this smart. He had gotten away with everything so far. He just needed to stay calm. "Honey," he croaked, his voice wobbling just enough to sell the act. "My God, I thought you were dead," Jennifer finished for him, arching an eyebrow. "Yes, you did, didn't you?" Ed's heart lurched. He saw it now, the trap tightening around him. She knew everything. His lies, his schemes, his mistress. The room seemed to shrink around him, suffocating. I don't understand." "You understand perfectly," Jennifer interrupted, stepping fully into the house, forcing him to move back. "And so do they." She nodded toward the detectives. One of the uniformed officers spoke. "Mr. Langston, we have some questions regarding your wife's supposed death. You may want to come with us." Ed's knees nearly buckled. This is some kind of mistake." Jennifer tilted her head, watching him with quiet satisfaction. "The only mistake was underestimating me, darling." Ed forced a chuckle, shaky and unconvincing. "Jennifer, sweetheart, this is absurd. Let's sit down and talk about this." "Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you?" Her voice turned steely. "Just the two of us, alone. But no, Ed. This time, we talk with an audience." The detective gestured toward the driveway, where a patrol car waited, its engine humming in the early morning quiet. "Shall we?" Ed knew there was no escape. Not this time. As the officers moved to escort him outside, his gaze met Jennifer's one last time. The woman he had tried to erase. The woman who had just rewritten his fate. Jennifer set her coffee cup down, her fingers lightly tracing the rim as she studied Noah. His smile was calm, but there was something else behind it. A quiet confidence, a certainty that made her heart race just a little faster. She had known him for some time, but in all their interactions, whether in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors of the hospital or in hushed conspiratorial whispers during their plan to expose Ed, there had always been a certain distance between them. Now, with the dust settling, that distance felt unnecessary. Noah leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I'd like you to have dinner with me." Jennifer blinked. "Dinner? As my favor." His voice was light, teasing, but there was no mistaking the sincerity in his eyes. She laughed, shaking her head. "That hardly seems like a fair trade. You helped me fake my own death and expose my husband's betrayal." "Ex-husband," Noah corrected with a grin. "Right," Jennifer said, exhaling. "Ex-husband." The word felt good on her tongue. She tilted her head, watching him. "And in return you just want dinner?" Noah smirked. "I'm a simple man. Good food, good company. That's all I need." Jennifer considered this, then leaned back, crossing her arms. "What if I say no?" He shrugged. "Then I'll just keep asking. You know I'm persistent." Jennifer rolled her eyes but couldn't help the way her lips curled into a smile. Damn him. He was making it hard to say no. She exhaled, looking around the apartment, her apartment for now. Soon she would sell it and move on. A fresh start. A little house. Her eyes flickered back to Noah. Maybe not alone. She lifted her coffee cup and clinked it lightly against his. "Fine," she said. "Dinner. But if you think this is some grand romantic gesture..." Noah raised a brow. "Who said anything about romance?" Jennifer laughed. "Oh, please, you're exactly the kind of guy who makes a move right after saving the day." He feigned a gasp. "That's offensive. I let you have your moment of victory before making my move." "Very considerate of you," she mused. "Always," he said, and this time his voice was quieter, more serious. Jennifer held his gaze for a long moment. Then, finally, she nodded. "All right, Doctor." Persistent. "Dinner it is." Noah's grin widened, and for the first time in a long time, Jennifer felt something warm bloom in her chest. Relief. Hope. Something she thought she had lost. A second chance. Maybe not just at life, but at love. And this time, she was walking into it with her eyes wide open.